Hello, everybody. I would like to read for you my short story, Green Chains, which was first published in Asimov's magazine in April of the year 2000. Time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. Dylan Thomas, Fern Hill. That morning, Moselle had gone walking through the Saugus Hills. It was early enough that pockets of dew still lingered in the shadows. In a few hours, however, the late summer heat would rise in waves and burn them all away. She reached the road, moving with an easy, hip-swinging stride, thumbs hooked in her belt loops. Crescents of sweat darkened her tank top below her breasts. The waistband of her jeans was already damp. Chicago bred, she was still nervous about walking bare-legged in rattlesnake country. She'd come to Southern California shortly after her marriage and still lived in the house she and Lewis had built together. Now she paused just inside the door, caught by the familiar sensation of airlessness. As if on cue, the phone rang. Moselle went to her desk, a door placed across two-drawer metal filing cabinets, and cradled the phone between her shoulder and one ear. Hello? It's me, Sadie. Moselle had tuned Sadie's piano for years before they realized they'd become friends. Sadie, the art director for a small recording company in the San Fernando Valley, played long, cool jazz into the evenings. Now Moselle heard the shift in Sadie's voice, as if her friend had just changed to a minor key. What's wrong? Sadie said, with a quick indrawn breath, my mother died Tuesday. I took her in for a CAT scan of that shadow that showed up on her last chest x-ray. She went into cardiac arrest right there in the imaging center. Cardiac arrest. Moselle heard the words as a rhythm exercise. Tuesday, 3 days ago. The sweat on Moselle's arms turned cold, as if it carried the memory of the December morning her own mother died. Having lost a long and gallant battle with breast cancer, her aunt said, quoting the newspaper obituary as an incantation against their own advancing years. Now, 10 years and 2,000 miles away, Moselle could still smell the gray Chicago sky. Her father had died when she was too young to remember him. Sometimes the loss of her mother was the defining experience of her life. There's a memorial reception Sunday at her condo, Sadie said. We're having it there because so many of her friends live in the complex. It's hard for them to travel. Moselle lowered herself into the desk chair. Are you all right? It's better this way. She was 80, and didn't want extraordinary measures taken. Extraordinary measures. Rhythms, like the beating of a human heart. I only met her once, that time we went to visit, but I don't think she was the kind of person who would want to linger on, Moselle's voice said. Something within her stirred, inarticulate, almost passionate. When my mother died, I was the one who pulled everything together. I made all the arrangements. The smell of the mortician's office, the waxy, perfect petals, the way his mouth curled up at only one corner. The phone calls, the newspapers, the lawyers. Sitting alone at the piano in the empty house, fingers on the keys, remembering the touch of her mother's hands resting on top of her own, closing her eyes and playing the opening movement of her release over and over. And then, when it was all over, Moselle finished, I just fell apart. It was the wrong thing to say, telling Sadie the same thing was going to happen to her. Oh, what can I do to help? She said, too quickly. Oh, really, if you want any of her furniture, It's all good quality. She had what's called impeccable taste. I don't have room for it here, so I'm just going to have to give it to Goodwill. And come, if you can, on Sunday. Moselle penciled the date and time in her appointment book. She wrote everything in pencil, erasable. I'll be there. She let the receiver down on the cradle and rubbed her arms. Her skin felt warm and damp. She went over to her mother's piano. It was a Kimball upright with a cherry finish and a deep scratch across the top. Moselle had no idea where the scratch came from. Her mother was always so particular about the piano. She never let anyone put pencils or sheet music on top of it. Nothing but a starched linen runner and 2 bayberry candles, which she never lit. Moselle filed a claim with the furniture movers, but their records showed it had been damaged when they picked it up in Chicago. Now she ran her fingers over the scratch, wondering the same old questions. All the years of music had left no visible trace, and yet this moment of carelessness remained, indelible, another thing she would never know about her mother. In between winter weekends at Mammoth, Louis used to stack his skis beside the piano. Moselle had worried about them falling on the piano, but they never did. Now she tried to imagine one of Sadie's mother's overstuffed chairs, the fabric textured like oatmeal and straw, filling the space. She realized she left it empty deliberately, like a reflection of the Louis-sized hole in her heart. Louis had been a mistake. She knew that now. An attempt to ease an even deeper loss. She'd realized that on the very day she and Sadie had gone to visit Sadie's mother in Dana Point. They'd gone walking along the private beach behind the gated retirement complex. It had been March, the sky a chalky Chicago gray. Louis hadn't left her yet, but that walk on the beach was when Moselle realized that she wanted him to, needed him to. She could put her finger on the exact moment she knew her marriage was truly over, could still feel the sand between her toes and the smear of beach tar on one heel. She'd been telling Sadie how unattractive Louis made her feel. Her nose too long, her body too thin, her breasts too pendulous, her hair too mousy. Everything to this or not enough that. I think you're beautiful, Sadie said. I think you deserve to be loved. It had all come clear in that moment that no matter what Louis said, he didn't make her feel loved. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe no one could. Not as long as the sense of absence echoed like an unending coda through her life. That Sunday, Moselle dressed with particular care, although in California, people wore whatever they liked to funerals. She chose a skirt in wine-colored silk, a white blouse, and a necklace of antique silver filigree and onyx. At the back of a dresser drawer, she found the straw box in which her mother had once kept the love letters from her early marriage. Moselle had never read them. Her mother burned them the night her father died. In the box was a scarf, silk with hand-painted butterflies. It had once had sequins, but Moselle had picked them off when she was a child. Her mother had been angry at the time. The scarf was an expensive one, and the fabric had torn where Moselle pulled the threads. She placed each element on her body as if it were a flower in a Japanese arrangement, each symbolizing something profound and mysterious. When she was done, she studied the effect in the bathroom half mirror, as if she could find the answer in her own reflection. A grimy film covered Moselle's battered Toyota pickup. Lois had bought it for her, and she'd chosen the color, desert sand, thinking the dust wouldn't show, but it always did. She rolled the window down before she got in. The plastic upholstery felt sticky, half melted. The air smelled of madrone and sage. Cicadas whined from the field beyond her neighbor's house. Heat lay sullen and brooding over the hills. By noon, it would hurt to breathe. Sadie's mother had lived in a private beach community with a white iron gate and speed bumps like giant anacondas stretched out beneath a carpet of asphalt. The guard, a leather-lean older man, showed his teeth in Moselle's direction without actually looking at her, and said he couldn't find her name on the guest list. Cars piled up behind her. Someone honked. "You'll have to wait on the side while I let this lot through," the guard said. Moselle set her lips together and took a firmer hold of the steering wheel. If she'd been driving a Beaver instead of her pickup, he'd have let her pass without a question. Memory flooded up in her that last piano audition when she was still living at home. She'd stood in the wings waiting for her turn. Her hands trembled just as they did now. She remembered the ice-edged moment when she realized that no matter how hard she tried, she simply wasn't good enough to make it as a solo pianist. After a few minutes, the guard hung up his phone and said everything was cleared. Moselle was still shaking when she parked the car in the visitor's lot. Although Moselle had visited the apartment before, that day they had gone walking on the beach, what struck her now was the sharpness of its edges. She thought there must be metal strips like bones beneath the paint, protecting the drywall from accidental bumps and knocks. Or maybe there had never been any grubby-handed baseball bat-wielding children. She smiled at herself, remembering how she used to gallop down the hallway that stretched the length of her family's apartment. Huge baskets of white and pale yellow flowers, calla lilies and rosebuds set in masses of baby's breath, lined the front wall. They were perfect and scentless. Moselle imagined some florist paring away the browned edges from the petals. There were other things you couldn't discard that easily. They persisted just beyond the edge of your vision, festering, fermenting, until they stole part of your life and took it for their own. On the mantelpiece sat a row of photographs in silver frames. An old couple, stiffly posed, a man in a navy uniform, and a beautiful young woman in 1940s dress. The same woman, holding a baby, Sadie's high school graduation picture, her hair sprayed and teased into geometric perfection. There were a few pictures of the naval officer, older. Sadie's parents had divorced amicably when she was in college, and her father lived, unremarried, in Florida. The apartment filled with people, a patchwork of white hair, rounded backs, navy dresses with tiny polka dots, hands clutching canes and walkers. 2 chairs, upholstered in oatmeal straw fabric, had been drawn up as if for polite conversation. A white-coated nurse's aide lowered an old man into one of the chairs. Food had been laid out on the dining room table. Cold sliced ham and cheese, olives and crackers, and a huge mound of strawberries and melon balls studded with plastic toothpicks. Mixed with the aroma of the strawberries and ham came memories of other smells: pickled herring and lox, chopped chicken livers, poppy seed bagels, the faint greasy odor of schmaltz. The feast was Aunt Esther's doing. Moselle wondered if there weren't some universal principle that called for an abundance of indigestible food following almost any tragedy. One of the men, a pastor of some inoffensive denomination, gave a brief eulogy. Moselle listened for a few minutes until she was sure he'd never met Sadie's mother. She found Sadie in the kitchen, wrestling ice cubes out of their trays. "Here, let me. You shouldn't be doing this." "What else should I do then? Go out and sit with my mother's friends? Watch them wondering who will be the next to go?" Sadie looked up. Moselle saw the tracery of veins in her eyes, the fine reddening around her nostrils. Another presence which had always been there, just out of reach, leaned ever closer now. "Let them say all the things they need to say," Moselle heard her say. "Let them pretend they can take the love they felt for the friend they have lost and pour it into you, her daughter." She put her hands on Sadie's shoulders, felt the muscles knotted tight. I'll take care of this. Sadie left in a little eddy of silence behind in the kitchen. Moselle took a shuddering breath. What she'd said about the mourners was right, but she didn't know how she knew it. It was as if for a moment she'd seen them through different, older eyes. After she'd gotten the ice cubes into the insulated buckets, Moselle went to stand at the kitchen door. She watched Sadie move through the room, stopping at each person. Hands gone big-knuckled with arthritis reached out to touch her. Moselle knew how they would feel, the dry skin, those fingers with their thickened yellow nails, the way they would linger for an extra half-second. Again, her eyes stung, and she didn't know who she was thinking about. Aunt Esther and Uncle Saul and all the cousins, some she'd never met before, each of them holding a secret memory, each remembering a different woman. The fingers resting like hers on like sun-warm petals, coaxing sweetness from the yellowed ivory. Creeping down the hall to crouch unseen behind the big chair, listening, her toes curled into knots of pleasure. The lights turned low and soft on her mother's cheeks. The dark hair no longer sleeked back into a bun, but misted like an angel's. The head bent forward on the slender neck, eyes half closed. The long, tapering fingers extended over the keys, body rocking gently with the music. She'd been too young, too insecure to forgive herself for not having the talent to succeed on the concert circuit. The only thing left to her was to pretend she'd never cared, to use her perfect pitch to tune other people's pianos. So much of her life had been like that, borrowing other people's lives and sometimes even their dreams. Gradually, the apartment emptied. The old man with the nurse's aide went first. Sadie stood near the door as they shuffled past. The two old women, one a cousin and the other Sadie's aunt, her father's sister, bustled about like wind-up toys until Sadie took each of them by the elbow and told them she'd handle the cleaning up. They wilted with relief. Sadie sat back against the overstuffed sofa cushions, eyes closed. Her lids looked bruised, the rust-colored shadow streaking along the creases. The bones of her face curved outward along her cheeks and sank at her temples to define the skull beneath. For a moment, the shape changed subtly. The eye sockets deepened, and Moselle saw the traces of someone else's face. I'm glad you're here. Sadie reached out, fumbled, took one of Moselle's hands. Moselle sat down. I remember what it was like getting through those first few days. Do you ever give up missing her? Sadie cried. What do you do with all the things you've never told her? Where do you put the pain when there's no more room inside? Oh, Mose, it hurts. It hurts. Sadie turned her face against Moselle's shoulder and began to cry. Moselle put her arm around Sadie and stroked her hair. It felt surprisingly soft, silk slipping between her fingers, impossible to hold. She didn't know why she had expected it to be otherwise. Sadie pulled away, running her free hand over her face. I must look dreadful. My mother always told me I was an ugly duckling. Until the day she died, she kept waiting for me to turn into a swan, but I never did. What a disappointment I must have been to her. Moselle thought, no, don't say that. Sadie reached for a tissue from the box on the coffee table, one of several boxes placed judiciously around the apartment. I keep expecting her to come bustling out of the kitchen. She wore these slippers around the house. There are 3 pairs of them in the closet, and they make this funny squeaking sound. When I'd ring the bell, her slippers would be the first thing I'd hear, even before she opened the door. Again, Moselle was struck by some quality of Sadie's voice, a lingering harmonic, quiet and certain. Something shivered through Moselle like a wave of invisible heat. Funny, isn't it? Sadie sniffed and slumped deeper between the cushions. I keep talking about my mother as if I could hold on to her that way, somehow keep her inside of me. Ghostly fingers resting on hers, a feathery breath along her neck. The indoor air suddenly seemed oppressively close, a miasma of cologne and overrich food. Moselle caught a whiff of something musty, like the air in a long shut-up attic. Moselle slipped her hand through the crook of Sadie's elbow and led her out on the deck. They stood together looking westward. The setting sun had left the sky soft, almost luminous. A hush fell over the beach. A flock of pelicans skimmed the waves, silent, their wings barely moving. For a moment, Moselle looked out with someone else's eyes, turning to see a face which was neither Sadie's nor that of her aged mother, as Moselle remembered her, but the overlapping images of the young woman in the photograph, holding her baby, and fainter still, the lingering imprints of yet another woman standing behind her. Their faces wavered like layers of silk blown in a breeze. Moselle fumbled for Sadie's mother's name, Leona. On impulse, she held out her hand in formal greeting. I'm pleased to meet you, Leona. My name is Hannah. Speak to me, speak through me. Sadie shook hands with a light touch, not at all like her usual energetic grip. Chill spread through Moselle, starting at the palm end. Skin bone grew sharp and thin. Sky turning it hard with glare. Brightness, ancient faces with empty pits for eyes, forming in a moment and then blown away in the sea wind. Ghostly fingers touched her, drew her with the strength of the tide. Overhead, the pelicans screeched, their shadows elongated into reptilian form like pterosaurs. Give us life. Give us your life. Moselle tried to pull her hand free from Sadie's, but she couldn't move. Her heart stuttered. She could not breathe. Something poison-berry bitter thickened in her veins. For the first time, she knew what it was. Grief, her own grief, distilled, enshrined. The heavens went turbulent and primeval. Beaked monsters swooped from the heights. If she could, Moselle would have leapt into the sky with them to spread herself thin and thinner until there was nothing left of her but hovering candlelight memories. Let me go, brushed the edges of her mind, felt rather than heard. Let go before it's too late. Let go. Turn the pterosaurs back to pelicans, the tortured sky to a gentle sunset. She had only to open her fingers to release the clenched fist. To never know how the scratch had come to the piano, or the sorrow behind the sequined butterfly scarf, or the dreams of the young girl making endless music in the dark. To live her own life and no other. To be loved only as much as she had, no more, no less, and in no other way. Let me go. With a sob, Moselle tore herself from the pterosaur sky. Arms pulled her close and hard. She held on, digging her fingers into flesh that was warm and human and living. Some long time later, Sadie drew back. Goosebumps peppered her bare skin. Her shoulders quivered. Moselle stared at her open hands, bone of her mother's bone, at the scars that neither her mother nor anyone else would understand. She found a strange comfort in them. Moselle turned toward the horizon and filled her lungs with sea air. She tasted the colors of the fading sky, a child's fingers across ivory keys, dusting powder and bayberry candles, images that vanished before she could tell what they truly were. She felt only a sense of stillness, as if for that moment All the ghosts had faded away, leaving only the last clear light over the ocean. I hope you've enjoyed that, and let me know what you think. It's a little different piece for me. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the newsletter.